Australia has more to lose than any other country in terms of climate impacts, earliest. So if we don't deal with climate change, we're all going to die, clearly. But we're going to die in Australia a lot sooner. The coal industry in Australia is probably the most powerful political force we've ever had, because Labor in particular is beholden to the CFMEU, the coal union, and because the coalition takes most of their donations and has many of the staffers in, the Tory party, the coalition, come from the coal industry. So the only other political party that is an alternative are the Greens. And I'm not sure what the Greens are like in the UK, but in Australia they've had issues. So we've had 20 years of really staggering inaction on climate change. We haven't just done that in our own country. We've worked really hard to completely bugger up carbon negotiations at the international COP meetings. We have worked really hard to make sure nothing happened anywhere on that front. Very few outside Australia realise what kind of dire state our democracy is in, and it is extremely dire. The corruption at all levels, but particularly state and federal levels, is now like it's a standing joke. No one is surprised when people go, oh really, they gave them $500 million and they didn't even tender for it. Well, no, because their mates are on the board, so that's okay. It's very bad here at the moment. They've just passed a law that says we can now imprison refugees for the term of their natural life. And that is now legal in Australia. The current Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who's known unaffectionately as Scott from marketing or Smirko, is the most unlikely man for the Prime Ministership. He's a Pentecostalist, which means he's a happy-clappy. He ran tourism ads for years. He's the most vapid person that has ever graced our airways. It is really bad. I wish the adults would show up. The RFS is entirely voluntary. In New South Wales, there's about 4,000 of us. And, we just give up weekends, train. We get supplied with the fire engines, the boots and the helmets. What we found out during the fires is a lot of the equipment we had was complete shit, like no masks. Actually, we had hankies dipped in water over our mouths to try and breathe. We started having fires up north in places where we didn't normally have fires. And the summer before, we'd had fires in Tasmania. These were forests from before time, really extraordinarily damp, beautiful, soft, think Scottish Highlands, I guess, or Ireland. Anyway, they all started to burn from lightning strikes. And this is, I guess the other thing with this is climate change isn't just producing fires, it's producing different weather patterns. So we're now getting storms without rain, but with lightning. So in these really remote areas, you'll get massive lightning strikes that start the fires. We can't get to them and there's no rain with the storm. And that's why towards the end of that year, all the major firefighting chiefs went to Scott Morrison and said, we've got to talk about the summer that's coming because it's going to be a nightmare and we need extra resources from overseas, we need the water bombers from overseas, etc. And Scott Morrison wouldn't even meet with them.
Australia is doing our bit on climate change and we reject any suggestion to the contrary.
The Grose Valley is this huge, deep, Neolithic valley that actually has trees there from 30, 40,000 years ago in their gene. It's an incredibly old country. We had 3 super fires ringing Sydney and they joined up. That became unstoppable. And so in the city, we had days of no one outside because you couldn't breathe. Sydney's in a basin. So with the fires ringing the city, it would just pool down into the bowl and it was really frightening for a lot of people. There are 4,000 people just in New South Wales alone going out every day, and another 4,000 going out every night. And we're fighting fires that create their own weather systems. Like the 2 guys that died, the fire came in behind them. Such was the energy being released, it created a whirlwind that flipped their truck over and they died. We lost over 1 billion animals. We lost 36 people. We lost over 2,000 houses. We lost millions and millions and millions of acres of wilderness that was never meant to burn, and it'll never regrow because the fire was so hot it sterilised the ground. And all of that was predicted 10 years ago in a report from the scientists saying this is exactly what will happen. And it happened. And it's going to keep happening, and it's going to get a whole lot worse. What did come out of it, though, was a real sense of urgency to go back to First Nations firefighting technique. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have always farmed with fire in Australia. We need to learn those ways of fighting fire. We need to start working with the mosaic pattern of firefighting that is a 65,000-year-old practice in Australia. So the kind of poverty of information that white Australia has, continues to have after 200 years about this very old land, was revealed, and it was really good for the soul. The Burrup Peninsula has the greatest amount of rock art in the world. It's a place of enormous significance. There are 65, 70,000-year-old rock art of kangaroos and whales. BP's involvement there is that they are part of a joint venture that's headed up by a corporation called Woodside. But BP are in there with Shell and a couple of others. These are not employment-rich projects. They're resource-rich, and they will get very rich, but they are certainly not going to be creating any jobs. To get it out, they're going to blow up most of the rock art. And by the way, they actually pay almost zero tax in Australia. It's an Australian problem, it's a First Nations people problem, but it'll become a global problem because the carbon emissions it releases will impact all of us. It's evidence of how corrupt our democratic system is. That's what is so bad for so many is almost certainly going to go ahead. Change in Australia has never come from the mainstream. It has never come from major political parties. It has always come from the margins into the mainstream. And I think we will see that at some point.